educating people about the environment, and when Heather talked to me about this, it was a no-brainer. It's a very serious issue that we're facing, and I put together a few thoughts here and wanted to talk to you folks about it, and Heather has a couple other speakers lined up as well. Now we hear about GMOs and genetically modified frankenfoods, as they like to call it. It really kind of sounds like a bad movie, and I could even imagine the movie trailer sounding like this. From the people that brought you Agent Orange, from the people that brought you DDT and poison dioxins by the thousands, brings you genetically modified frankenfoods. Well, you know what? It's the sad reality, and it's the truth. In fact, Monsanto, for over 110 years, has been assaulting our environment and our health. They have a long history of it with plenty of examples. Now, you would think that a company that has killed, directly responsible for killing millions of people, and that's not exaggeration, and we'll get into that in a minute, and birth defects and disabilities, you name it, it goes on and on. You would think a company like that eventually would say, you know what, we have to be a responsible company and conduct our business in an ethical way. Have they done that? No! Absolutely not. From 1961 to 1971, Monsanto produced Agent Orange. Now, many of you know that was used during the Vietnam War as a defoliant. Now, what that did was basically knock all the leaves off all the vegetation so they could see the enemy. But what Monsanto knew, and that our soldiers didn't know, that the innocent civilians of Vietnam didn't know, are the health effects that that had, and the environmental effects as well. Now, the Vietnam Ministries of Foreign Affairs has stated that over 400,000 deaths and disabilities came out of Agent Orange. And additionally, over 500,000 birth defects. Now, second and third generations later, this is still happening in Vietnam. Now, some of the problems associated with it, heart disease, reproductive capacity, liver problems, you name it, the list of problems goes on and on. Now, generations born now, it's common to have mental and physical disabilities, and there really isn't a whole lot that can be done about it. Once it's in the system, it's there for a very long time. Now, going down the timeline here a little bit more, DDT. Now, DDT was produced by Monsanto from 1944 to 1972 when it was banned. It was banned for a very good reason. We're talking about the same company here that is producing our food. We're talking about the same company that has wreaked havoc on the world's environment and us and wildlife. Now, this insecticide, DDT, basically what it did was it brought to the brink of extinction bald eagles, peregrine falcons, osprey. It affected them for many years until 1972. There was merely hundreds of these birds left from populations of tens of thousands. The eggshells were so thin that they couldn't incubate them, and they cracked, and there was absolutely no reproductive survival whatsoever. Once that was banned, we've seen a steady increase, and today we have thousands of bald eagles and these other birds thriving now that we've taken care of this problem. We need to recognize that there's a problem now. Now, a little town in Alabama called Anniston, you may have heard about this in the news, there'll be 60 minutes to the story about it. This is just more history on the kind of company we're dealing with. For over 40 years, they produced PCBs, and they dumped PCBs and the chemical waste in open pits and released and discharged these contaminants into the river. To this day, that town is considered one of the most contaminated cities in the world. The kids aren't even allowed to play out on the lawns or kick up dirt. They have to stay in the streets, they have to stay on the sidewalks. There's been countless health-associated problems from what they've done there for many years. And it's not the only place this sort of thing has happened. The list can go on and on. Now, Agent Orange and DDT and all these problems, Monsanto, here's the thing. They knew about these risks all along. They did everything in their power to cover it up, and they're still practicing in that manner today. They have done all kinds of documents destroyed. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, one of the problems is that the FDA does not require Monsanto to do any sort of extensive testing on genetically modified foods at all. But we know. That's right. And you know who they leave the testing up to tell us that the food is safe? Monsanto. Does that make any sense at all? No. Now, central nervous system disorders. It goes on and on. The problem isn't just with these lab animals, because you may be aware that America and North America, the world, really is faced with a health crisis. A lot of these problems I've talked about, liver disease, diabetes, blood pressure issues, these are all things that are very prevalent today in our society. And is it a coincidence that we are eating more and more modified food and these things are rising higher and higher? It's not at all. Now, one of the things that we really need to stand up for is demand that there is proof, demand that there are tests, demand that these genetically modified foods, are shown to prove what they are trying to claim, and they're not, because independent testing has shown just the opposite, to be quite honest with you.
Labeling!
And labeling, absolutely. Let us make the choice. The fact that they have managed to get away with not labeling their food of genetically modified is really outrageous.
Repeal Protection Act!
Yes, we do need to repeal the Protection Act. Yeah! I absolutely agree. Yes. Now, getting into the GMO plants themselves, one of the little known facts is you would think that by modifying these plants that they're increasing at least the nutritional value of these plants. Far from it. The chemicals that they use, the herbicides, the way the soil is depleted of its natural microorganisms, all these things rob the plant of holding its natural nutritional value. So these plants aren't any better for you at all. In fact, organic food is much better for you, higher nutritional value, and yields a much greater deal of nutritional not shown that it is no benefit. The only benefit Monsanto has seen by producing these genetically modified crops are less manpower. And I don't know about you, I don't mind more farmers in the world. I think farmers do a good job. Plenty of people willing to do it. Guess what? The economy is not going to crash if we stop supporting these huge corporations that are producing these foods. Buy local, go to the farmer's market, buy organic, and grow your own.
Feed the poor with local food, not chemicals.
That's right. Feed the poor with local food. We don't need to be putting all these chemicals into the environment. These seeds that are given to the farmers do not produce seeds the following year. Many of you may have heard about this. So what does that do to the local farmers that are trying to grow things the right way using non-modified food? A lot of these crops are cross-contaminated by these GMO crops. And once that happens, these plants aren't going to produce seeds for that farmer who wants to save them for the next year. And when the farmer has actually saved those seeds because he has no choice and wants to use those, Monsanto has actually turned around and sued the local farmer for using seeds produced in his own gardens, in his own farm, that has been cross-contaminated by Monsanto.
And they won, too.
It goes on and on.
Farmer suicides due to stress.
Yes, in India, a lot of farmers have committed suicide, and other places in the world, because they are faced with economic disaster. What Monsanto has done, force them into corners and make them follow their rules, and they simply can't afford to do it. So there's a lot of scary stories out there. It really is a big, evil corporation. There's no two ways about it.
Monsanto!
Yes, Monsanto. On an ecological level, a lot of these plants require more and more herbicides. And, these so-called Roundup-ready crops produce their fruit and their product without being affected by huge doses of Roundup. And this glyphosate, that the Roundup is the main ingredient, is basically doused all over these plants. And what that does, it kills a lot of the native plants that are in the surrounding soils. Monarch butterflies require milkweed to feed on. The Midwest and out in the central part of the country has had a huge problem with monarch butterfly populations absolutely crashing because all the milkweed has been contaminated with the herbicides that they're using. Last year alone, I heard that the drop, one prediction, was over 59% in monarch butterfly populations. And that is only due to the heavy use of herbicides used in that part of the country that's affecting all these crops.
Save our bees!
Save our bees!
Save our bees!
Yes, the bees are pollinators. All of these organisms are affected. The ripple effect goes on and on. Our water systems are certainly affected. The heavy use of these fertilizers run off into lakes and streams, fill ponds, fill lakes, and what happens? You get huge outbursts and growths of algae in these ponds. And then when you get these huge growths of algae, it filters out the sunlight for the subaquatic vegetation that keeps the pond healthy, that oxygenates these waters, that keeps the fish thriving, and all the other organisms involved. And the ripple effect goes on and on. And when these algae blooms destroying lakes and rivers, that affects us too. Don't you think it doesn't? Because it does. These organisms that feed on organisms in the lakes and the streams, it goes through our entire food system. Now that's all I have to say for now, folks. Thank you for coming here today. And Heather...